Trial Lawyers University, where the Titans come to train. Produced and powered by LawPods.
All right, well, we're here with Mike Morse out of Detroit, Michigan. And Mike is an unusual participant on this podcast that, well, we'd never thought it coming because obviously when we talk to trial lawyers who get big verdicts at Trial Lawyers University, and Mike has been out of the courtroom for a while, but he decided to get back into it. So we were just together down in Chicago for a couple of days, a little while ago. It was a nice time at the NTL, new, what is that? Was that the Big Truck Auto Summit or something like that?
Yeah, first annual. It was great. I thought it was a good conference.
I thought it was a lot of fun. And Chicago is such an outstanding city. It's like, I've got to figure out how to do a conference there myself, except I heard the unions, I'm a real blue guy, but those unions are real strong. And those unions get involved, they can double the price of anything. So,
Okay.
So it is what it is. But anyways, you and I are about the same age because, I know Jason Wechter is one of your close friends, and he's also one of my close friends from high school. So how long have you been going at this law business for?
This is my 32nd year.
30 seconds. That's a good number. And tell me, when did you know that you first wanted to become a lawyer?
My dad, Joel Morse, was a trial lawyer here in Detroit. My whole upbringing, obviously, and I would go to court with him, and I'd go to his office with him every Saturday morning. And he just made practicing look fun, being a lawyer look fun. So I think I kind of just always knew. And then when I was in college, there was nothing else stoked my interest at the University of Arizona, and I applied to Detroit law schools.
And where'd you go to school?
University of Detroit.
I got the privilege of going to Detroit College of Law. It's the only school that accepted me. So
that's where my dad went.
Oh, well, that makes us a little better. Now
Yeah.
it's part of Michigan State, so it's got a little more street cred. But your father died prematurely, a little bit early on you, didn't he?
He died in 1990. I was 22. He was 49. I was in the middle of my first year law exams when he died, lecturing weirdly to trial lawyers about, I don't even know, trial practice and things like that down in Mexico. And it was, he had no symptoms. He was in good health. It was pretty tragic.
I can only imagine. And so you finished up at U of D, and tell us about how your career went from there.
So my dad was a big believer that he didn't want me to work for him right away. He wanted me to work at a real law firm, he'd call it. So I got a job at the largest personal injury firm here in Detroit at the time. It was called Lopate Miller. They're no longer around. And I worked there for the summer. Now that was a hard summer because he had just died in May, and I was working June, July, August at this law firm before second year law school. But I learned a ton, right? I learned how to research. I learned what a summary disposition was. They taught us it was summary judgment in law school. Anyway, I learned a ton, did that for a summer. And then during law school, I worked for another personal injury firm. The owner was related to my dad and knew my dad well. And I worked there for the rest of law school. And then after law school for 3 years, learning personal injury law, learning how to do depth, learning how to do trials. I did some trials. I was 25. And then 3 years into that tenure at that firm, out of the blue on September 21st, 1995, they fired me without notice, without any real explanation. They just fired me on a Friday. I drove to Chicago to visit my mom and stepdad to what the heck am I going to do now? And Monday morning, I opened an office, sharing space with Jason Wechter, your good friend, my good friend. Basically, I look at it as saving my life, saving my career. He said, we have an extra office with a desk and a chair, and we have a shared receptionist, and he really saved my life. I could go on and on about that, but that's when I started the Mike Morse Law Firm, September 21st, 1995, and I've been going at it ever since, never had a partner, knew I was never going to work for anybody ever again, and here I am.
So when you first start out, you start out trying a lot of cases?
Of course, I did. I tried a lot of cases. So
how many cases do you think you tried before you really built your business? I mean, were you the
30
trial guy?
30.
Okay.
So Dan, what I would do is I'd go to these law firms. I had no cases. And I'd say, let me try your cases. Only pay me if I win. We'll split the fee. You guys pay the costs. I had no money. So I was learning how to try cases on their dime. It was great. I thought it was genius. And it kept me busy, and it kept me trying slip and falls, dog bites, auto accidents, anything. I didn't matter the value, didn't matter the facts. I just wanted to be in the courtroom and try cases. I loved it.
But eventually you kind of transitioned into more of a business of law and, and scaled your firm. And what's your firm look like today?
So we have 225 legal professionals all here in Michigan. 55 of them are lawyers, and we settle anywhere from 220 to 250 million dollars worth of cases a year.
All right. And you got involved in the case that verdict wise, this case that that you recently tried. What was that case about?
That case was about a 21-year-old individual by the name of Dennis Preka, an Albanian gentleman who was going to two colleges, actually. He was going to U of D and U of M, and he had a test the next day. So he asked his buddy if he could study at his house. They went to his house. He asked for an Adderall. He did not have a prescription for it, but he asked for an Adderall. And he said, I don't have one. And another guy at the house, his name is Nick Remington, said, oh, here, I have this. This will help you study. Take this. Trusting college kid takes the pill. Turns out that pill was Molly or MDMA, a high dose of it. We don't know exactly how much. And then within a half hour, 45 minutes, Dennis started feeling the effects of the Molly. They were his friends, so-called friends, were laughing and videotaping him and posting him on Snapchat and sending messages. People are texting, what the heck is he on? And one of the guy who gave him the pill, who turns out he is an actual drug dealer at 21 years old, said, I gave him Molly, I gave him meth. And it's methadone, which is a derivative of Molly. And he started suffering and struggling. And over a 4 or 5 hour period, he started dying. And he had all the signs of dying, and they didn't call 911. They didn't call anybody for help. And he eventually died at the home, roughly around 3 a.m., and they called the police at 9:05 a.m.
Wow, they waited 6 hours to call the police. And I know there was video evidence because these kids were posting, his struggle on Snapchat, and somebody recorded that and, forwarded to you, some good Samaritan, because I, had a chance to watch it. And it's really difficult to watch, to watch somebody die. I've never seen anything like it, actually.
Yeah, the jurors hadn't either. They were
No,
they were
I,
crying.
I, I can't imagine what it was like because I only watched a minute and a half out of the 3.5 because I just couldn't watch it. I'm just like, and I got a
It gets worse, Dan. It gets worse.
right, and I got a pretty thick shell. So this case comes in to your office. How did this case, how did you decide to do this case? Because it's an unusual case,
So the family, the husband and wife came in and met with me. I remember hearing the story. I remember welling up with tears. I remember having a daughter the same exact age as Dennis. I remember being scared, and something came over me that I said, I want to help you. I've never done a case like this before. I don't know if anybody's ever done a case like this before, but I want to help you. And I may even, the family reminds me that I said, I'll try your case for you. Maybe I said that in the moment, but I felt for them. It was just such a tragic story. And I said yes.
okay. And so this case, from the time you took it in to the time it went to trial, how many years went by?
5.5.
All right, so we lived through COVID, and there was a criminal case, so the civil proceedings were stayed throughout the criminal case. And I know in the criminal case there was the charges were dismissed against all these guys for prosecutorial misconduct. That had been shocking for the family, but obviously increased the burden that you must have felt to find them some justice. And so, some 5.5 years later, when this case is now ready to get to trial, and you haven't been in the courtroom in roughly maybe 15 years as the trial lawyer, is that correct?
Well, I was about 9 years ago, I was preparing for a trial, and I did actually do some motions, and I was there, settlement conferences and case evaluation with a bus motorcycle case that I was ready to try, but that settled literally on the first day of trial. So when I started treating my law firm like a business, like you mentioned earlier, 15 years ago, that's when I hired 20, 30 lawyers to try all the cases and to treat this like a business and help as many people as we can. So that's when I stopped trying 4 a year, 2 a year, 3 a year. But I was still mentoring and counseling my lawyers, my clients, but it had been a while. So I'm not trying to take away from that, but I have been
Okay, whatever.
dabbling.
Okay,
What? Okay.
so it's been 15 years since you were in a courtroom in front of a jury. Okay, so it is what it is. But anyways, tell us about how, like, there's a lot of people that I know, the great lawyers like Joe Freed, Sean Claggett. They get involved with a case, where they really start digging in maybe 30 days ahead of time because they don't. That's just their business model, right? But they have a process. I mean, they have trial teams and all that. So tell us about, how you decided to get ready, how you go about getting ready for this trial when you're finally going to hit, when it's going.
So let me just say, I didn't know they did that 30 days. I had a trial team on this case the whole time. They worked up the case for 5.5 years. They argued 15 motions in limine on this case, summary dispositions, court of appeals, bankruptcy courts. This case was in every court in Michigan. Judge kept bouncing the trial date. It was on my schedule in April and then June and then July, and I wasn't getting ready because I was waiting. I hate showing up at a courthouse and them kicking me. And then I was told I'm sorry, August 5th, I think it was, it's going. So 2 weeks before April 5th, it was a Monday morning, I said, send me everything. And I started devouring the file. Started with a 100-page police report and depositions and facilitation summaries and motions. And I read everything. I had to devour everything. And I have a pretty good memory. So I did that. I took notes. That's the first step. I also hired a jury consultant who actually also acts like a coach. His name is Stephen Nat, Hnat. He's a local lawyer who's helped some trial lawyers in my town with some of the biggest verdicts.
Right. I mean, didn't he used to wasn't he like Jeffrey Feiger's exclusive consultant before Jeff took a turn to,
Back in the day, I don't know how long ago that relationship was, but back in the day, yes, he worked with Jason Wechter on his big recent $30 million win. Excellent guy, but not just a jury consultant. Him and I have had a relationship for 15 years and he likes me. I like him. And when I was getting ready for that trial I told you about 10 years ago, he was coaching me again how to best do a jury selection. So I used to do it. I read the books and I got up in front of a jury and I tried to pick a jury and I didn't know what I was doing, but I still was winning cases and you just kind of get it. He not only picks cases, but he taught me the best way to jury select, best way to do an opening, best way to do a closing. He helped us with the witness order, things like that. So it felt really good to have a coach who was going to, make me take my reps. And I know you're a big fan of practice and he said, all right, get 8 secretaries in here, paralegals in here, receptionists in here. And he'd put them in my large conference room and I'd come in and they were my jury for an hour, just an hour. And then I probably did that 6 times with him. And the first couple were rough and I was nervous and I was rusty. People would say things and I wouldn't know what to say back. I just didn't have that. I don't know. In this particular case, I had to test areas that I had never tested before. Last time I tried a jury trial, I wasn't on TV. I didn't have 300 billboards. Lots of issues. Anyway, so you asked me how I got ready. He was the main person to get me ready. Practice, practice, practice until I felt ready to walk in.
and also Jason Wechter helped you a little bit, didn't he?
Jason came over for my first discussion. His office is half a mile from me. He brought me a great book on grief and dying that I read. He just had some sage advice because of all the stuff he's learned. That guy, first of all, loves you, loves TLU. He goes to all the seminars and he devours your content and he is a real student on this. And he said to me, you should have started this prep 6 months ago. And I said, yeah, I probably should have, but I didn't. So help me. And anyway, he did come by and help. And he was a big help.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Great guy. So you start doing all your prep work and stuff. And let's talk about the jury selection. Being that you hadn't done jury selection in a long time, I know that you and Steve and your team, narrowed it down to 5 topics, which I think is smart because there's so many different things you could talk about. But if you haven't done it for a while, it's better just perfect the flow and the of whatever you keep. Pretend like you have 20. These people have 20-minute jury selection. You got 2, 3, 4, 5 topics. Those are most important things. So what did you guys decide when you first started out, what do you first start out with?
So we kind of started out with the elephant in the room being me, because we have sent out a lot of letters. We've sued a lot of people. People may like my commercials. They may hate my commercials. So I said, how
They
many
may, they
people
may,
here
they
know?
may like your mom. They may hate your mom. You just don't know.
And I threw that out there, and they laughed. And luckily, it was all positive. None of them had gotten a letter from me threatening to sue them or anything like that. So that was good. And then in that getting them comfortable with me, I got them comfortable with that this may not be the right trial for you. So I went through that whole thing, explained to them that I think you're all fair. I'm fair, but there's cases I shouldn't sit on and couldn't sit on. And I gave them an example of that. And then I asked them some questions about that whole process. Do they think there's too many lawsuits? Do they think I'm part of the problem with the advertising of too many lawsuits? Anyway, that was number one. And number two was explaining to them brutal honesty, you know, taking a page out of Nick Rowley's and your content, and that went really well. And I thanked them for their honesty, and some of them gave me some great answers. The third area we went into was that this was a death case of a 21-year-old, that nobody ever has to put a money value on a human life. And so I went through whether or not they have had any recent losses, family losses, not just losses of an old person dying at 95 years old, but also tragic losses. Several people had lost people from drugs and overdosing. And it gave me an opportunity not to shy away from that. I think my younger self would have been nervous about that. Some of the videos I watched, help put that in perspective, that was a gift to talk about it and apologize for them and mourn with them and ask them how they're doing with those losses and explain that this isn't a overdose case. This was a poisoning case, and reframe it in that way for them so they didn't think that this was like a voluntary thing. They all seem to get that. In that category of death cases, I definitely had to talk about the wrongful death case, and that there's several categories. And does anybody feel that they can't award money to somebody for conscious pain and suffering, even though they're no longer here to enjoy the money? And should they not be awarded damages? And I said, there's people who feel that. Who here feels that? And somebody,
Did you get some responses for that?
I got a hand. I got a hand. Steve prepared me for this because I realized that that's one of the biggest complaints. And I responded to him. I said, we're here to do justice and to help this family and community by finding money damages. And one way it's about money. But if we don't award money damages for a person who dies unjustly, what is that? And he didn't have an answer. And I said, that would be injustice or something that's unjust. Would you agree with me? And he did agree with me. And I was ready for that. Like, if we do nothing for a dead person, how is that just? It's unjust and unjust. And so that felt good. I practiced that, and they got it. And it resonates. I mean, I've been a trial lawyer for 32 years, and that was a great way of saying it. I wanted somebody to say it. So I made sure that the whole panel was ready to give money damages for somebody who wasn't alive.
How
The
long?
fourth is
How long did you spend in jury selection?
just under 2 hours.
Just under 2 hours.
And she was yelling at me, and there was getting objections, and
Oh, the judge was yelling at you?
she threatened to cut it off and do it herself because I was arguing the case and blah, blah, blah. 5.5 years to get there, and I can't have 2 hours in jury selection. But she sped me up. The fourth area, Dan, that we went through was the medication issue. I was very concerned about comparative negligence. My team wasn't overly concerned. The mock trial that we did wasn't overly concerned. Mike Morse was overly concerned. And so I approached it. Do you want me to share how I approached that?
Why not? I mean, we're going to be doing a webinar that's going to be much more in depth on this
Yeah.
on September
Well, I don't have
3rd.
to, but basically I said I've never litigated a case like this. I'm an auto lawyer, I'm a truck lawyer, but I learned a lot about the difference between medications and drugs, the difference between overdosing and poisoning, getting ready for this case. How many people here are familiar with Adderall? Hands went up. And I said, are you familiar that kids use this for studying, whether or not they have a prescription? Everybody was nodding, right? And I admitted with this jury, I've taken medications that I didn't have a prescription for. And it's such a common thing that I said I talked to my kids about it. And, I told them a little bit about the story, what happened. And is anybody going to hold it against him and not be able to listen to the totality of the facts and the circumstances before they render judgment? I basically, this is also another thing that Steve taught me that was great. And I didn't know if this is something like in my gut, I didn't, like somebody said, I think it's wrong. A back row juror, number 5, said, I think it's wrong to take a prescription drug without a prescription. And I looked at him. I said, sir, thank you for your honesty. I agree with you. Now, mind you, I'm saying something complete. The parents of the kid weren't happy that I said that, but it's a fact. I have 20-year-old kids. Who wants them taking prescription drugs? So I was able to go there with him and I said, sir, but I get it. I've done it. Kids do it. Are you able to listen to the facts in this case and put that aside? I said, but listen to the totality of the case because you're going to hear so many more facts than just that. He promised me yes. We kept him on the jury. That was great. So educating them about medicine versus drugs. And then the last thing, I went back to damages. I said at the end, I said, you guys are going to have an impossible job to put a dollar amount on these 15 categories for conscious pain and suffering, mental anguish, embarrassment, severe emotional distress, fright and shock, humiliation. Does anybody here feel they can't do this? No hands went up. And then I'm going to suggest a big number at the end of this case that I feel is fair and just. And it's a hard job, and I don't envy you because nobody ever has to put a dollar amount on somebody who's passed, especially the loss of a child, especially for a child who suffered 4 or 5 hours. But that's what you're going to have to do. Do you all think you can do this? And then I said, if I ask for a number of $100 million or more, does anybody here have a cap on damages in your brain right now that you say, Mike, I can't go over 100 million, 500 million, a number? Is there a number in your heads? And one of the jurors, number 4, said, what is he, Elon Musk? And I said, thank you. Why do you say that? And we had a discussion, and I brought Elon Musk into my closing argument, and it helped me. That little poison fruit, and I left him on, and he was the foreman, the guy who said that. Those are the 5 categories. I had answers for every bad thing. I practiced answers for, I say bad thing, as your team, as Dick Rowley and everybody says, it's a gift. But I really did see it for the first time in this trial that it truly was a gift. And I was able to educate and empathize and agree on things that a typical lawyer may not agree on. I'll stop.
So when you said you watched videos, those were videos on TLU On Demand.
Yes, sir. Yes.
What videos we were watching. So TLU On Demand, of course, has all of the 380 webinars we've done and all of the live conferences we've done over the last 3 years have all been recorded and on there. And we've collected all the transcripts, PowerPoints, and pleadings for all these cases. And it's also an app for the phone. So it's a pretty solid resource. It's going to become a lot more solid after TLU Vegas, this October, because then there's going to be another 162 hours of content that's going to be produced and put up there by some of the greatest trial lawyers in the country. So I'm pretty stoked about that. Those people you talk about, Nick Rowley's going to be doing for 3 days, Sean Claggett for 3 days, Brian Panish for 3 days, Joe Fried and Satch Oliver are teaching for 3 days. So, and we got the trial consultants for 3 days, a day and a half on jury ball and big data. So we got a lot going on there. But what were you going to say, Mike? And Mike Morse will be there.
I wanted to say, hey, listen, I know you didn't ask me to say this, but I texted you, Dan, I'm trying my first case in a while, and you sent me free login and password for a few months, and I just want to thank you for that because it absolutely helped me.
Good. Well, that's what we built it for, is to help people get some justice for their clients because it's a tough business we're in. So you get your jury selected, and now you're about to give your first opening in on a serious case. The first one really in 15 years. And so, tell us about how you went to start to really prepare and get ready to be present and to be an advocate for this family.
So I definitely watched some videos. I read some articles. I was meeting with my jury consultant, and we sat down on the things that we wanted to cover. We thought liability was going to be important, comparative negligence issues, proximate cause issues, and everything I read and watched is like, I need to win this in opening. I want to win this in opening. And that was my goal. And I was reminded that 75% of this opening should be about damages, and 25% should be about liability. When I used to try cases, I probably did the opposite. And I was afraid to talk about damages. I was afraid to talk about mental anguish and all this. I thought the jury was going to think I was a greedy trial lawyer or whatever. This is the first time I've actually really embraced it, and it was opening. So I thanked the jury. My team suggested that we play 10 seconds out of the 3.5 minute video. And as I was preparing the night before, we were at, I don't know if you remember the restaurant Caucus Club in Detroit. I was there and I was practicing. I was standing up at my table and I said, guys, I want to play the full 3.5 minutes in my opening. And I want to knock this out of the park. And that was just a gut call. They said, fine, Mike, go with your gut. I had jurors crying.
Yeah. Other than this 3.5 minute video, was there any other visuals that you used in your opening?
My team helped create a PowerPoint for me, which had the toxicology report, which had Snapchat messages showing how bad these guys are, showing them that they started pointing the fingers. Hours after he died, they said, let's meet by the park, in the park by the tree to discuss it before we talk to the police. I mean, we there was a lot of visuals like that, pictures of the family, pictures of his sister, stepsisters, picture of his parents. And, I told the story. I told the horrific story. I played the video. I argued, that, what happened to Dennis, we all know. But why it happened, we don't know. And the three people, you'll hear from three people today who know exactly what happened, but they won't tell you because they're all pleading the fifth. They can give relief to this family. They can change their mind and get on that stand today and tell you. I don't know if they will. I doubt it. But we've been waiting 5.5 years to tell this story and to finally get some justice.
Order of proof. Who would you lead off with in this case?
To set the stage, we let off with the two police officers.
Okay. And when you say to set the stage, what was the substance of their testimony?
I mean, there was a dead 21-year-old. They had to investigate. They had to show up at the scene. They did interviews. They omitted the three individuals at the home. It omitted that the drug dealer, Nick Remington, was actually there until a week later, I believe. So we wanted them to point that out. They didn't find drugs on Dennis. They didn't find drugs in his backpack. They didn't find anything. They, just setting the stage as to what the boys told them.
Okay. And so after the cops, let me ask you the family, because, where do you decide to put the family members to talk about their loss?
So we talked about that at length, and my team, in addition to Steve, believed that they should be the last two witnesses of the trial. They brought it home. They were excellent. I did the dad, Chris Filiaccio did the mom, and we practiced, and they did really, really well.
Okay. And was there any cross-examination from the defense of your parents?
On the dad, one of them asked one question, and he something like, isn't being a parent really hard? I didn't prep him on this answer, and he's like, I've done a lot harder things than raising my kids. And he says, no further questions. And he sits down. The mom was in tears. They did not cross-examine her.
Did the defense call any witnesses?
None.
So that must have been a short defense case. Like closing argument. Did you practice your closing argument? Well, let me ask you, I never asked you on opening. In opening, did you tell the jury, did you restate the number that you were going to tell them that you wanted in the closing?
I did not. Voir dire was an hour earlier, and I didn't repeat myself.
So, Mike, when it comes time for the closing argument, you've been wrestling. You've never really asked for a big number before. The 8 did, more than $1 million, and so how do you come to terms? How do you get that number right in your mind so that you can credibly ask the jury for it?
Well, I did a lot of soul searching. I watched a lot of videos from people who've done it before. I talked to my legal team, and I thought about my own life and my kids and what would resonate with a jury. My jury consultant basically thought 50 million was a good number. I remember doing some research about artwork and that the Mona Lisa was worth 840 million. And when I got to the jury room, I asked for $100 million in compensatory damages. And I said, if you think that my clients have suffered exemplary damages, I would ask you to double it. I was confident. I looked him in the eyes. I felt good about that number. And that's what I asked for.
How long was the jury out for?
3 hours.
And what was that time like for you? Because I know this is like always the toughest time. Nobody can understand what it's like to be a trial lawyer waiting for that time?
No, it was my heart was beating out of my chest. I was pacing the hallways. Somebody wanted to talk on the phone, like on a different case. I took the call to distract myself. And then I remember sitting on the opposite end of the hallway, and the sheriff came out and went like this, and we all ran back in. And 5 minutes later, we knew. I mean, it's a crazy time, Dan. I mean, the lunch before was crazy too. It's crazy, but it's a good crazy, I guess. We all love it.
And what did the jury finally result the verdict for compensatory and exemplary?
They gave 40 million for Dennis's conscious pain and suffering. They gave 20 million to the mother, and they gave 15 million in exemplary damages.
But nothing to the father?
It was a stepfather, and they're not allowed to take
Got it.
under the
Makes
under
sense.
the WDA.
Just curious, did the defense have any suggestion on number or value or argument?
They did not. I did argue in rebuttal that this is going to be the easiest part of your case because they didn't. It's uncontroverted. The evidence is uncontroverted. We asked for 200 million, and they didn't even mention it. They didn't bring a witness about it. They didn't argue it. It's uncontroverted, and you can just take my recommendation. They objected, but the judge overruled them. It was argument. They didn't mention damages, so I said it. I made that argument during rebuttal.
What did they just say in their closing? I'm just curious, because I just can't imagine what they could say.
They blamed Dennis for asking for the Adderall, that it was his fault. He put himself in this position. It was a party. He would go to these parties and hang out with these boys before, and it was kind of his own fault. And no one else is to blame but Dennis. And the jury saw through it. One interesting thing about rebuttal, it's a funny story. During rebuttal, my team, I had 3 people there. They're all handing me notes during their closing because, of course, they were bastardizing the evidence and screwing up the evidence. I had 50 little pieces of paper with notes for my rebuttal, and I had a prepared rebuttal. So the judge, in a miracle, it was like 1:45. We hadn't broke for lunch. He says, "Mr. Morse, before your rebuttal, we're going to lunch." Never happened in all my jury trials. I'm like, "Thank you, Judge." I went across the street to our lunch spot. I was meeting with our jury consultant, Chris and Austin and the family. And I said, "How do I synthesize this in a 15-minute argument?" And we talked about it. And he says, "You don't." He says, "You tell the jury that you know they're listening, that it's a short trial, and you thank them, you remind them of justice and full damages." And I did that, and it was 90 seconds. I could have gone on and on and on. And I told them I could have gone on and on. I showed them the stack of paper, and I said, "I'm not going to talk about that. You know that they screwed up what the cop said. You know that he didn't blame Dennis. You know this and that." I said, "But I'm going to respect you enough that you've been listening. I'm not going to bore you with that." And I said, "I'm not going to play the video again either because I know how upsetting that video is." And I said, "Most trial lawyers would stand up here and play that video 6 more times for you. But I'm not going to do it because it was so upsetting to you and it was upsetting to me. So just remember the laughter on that video. Remember what they did to Dennis when you go back into that jury room. And if anybody talks about in the jury room that those 3 defendants can't afford to pay or that they don't have the money to pay a large justice verdict, you knock on the door and tell the judge that there's misconduct going on in the jury room because there's no evidence that they can't pay this verdict, which means you can't argue it. It's not evidence. So if somebody brings up the inability to pay, you need to let the judge know. And that was key, I believe, in getting a higher verdict. I believe that was key in making sure that, because in our mock trial, they focused on that. And so I wanted to argue it. I did it in rebuttal. And 2 hours later, they came back with a verdict.
Nice. It must have been quite the nothing like those 2 hours waiting for a jury to deliberate. That's for sure. How many hours it is.
It was painful. But when they started reading the verdict, I didn't know how much in comparative negligence. They said yes to comparative negligence. As you're sitting there, it was like a 5-6 page form, and they started saying the right things, and tears started coming. The family's crying, and then the numbers came, and we realized we got justice for Dennis, and it was beautiful.
I imagine it was. And so it's quite the accomplishment. Be back on the saddle after a long time and winning. Let me ask you though, to change pace a little bit. In your 30, would you say 32 years you've been doing this?
Yes, sir.
32 years. So that was at 1990, what, two?
Yep.
1992, a little bit before me. So out of those 32 years, what, professional accomplishment, if it's not this one, maybe it's this one, because this probably, would you say that you're, I guess, most proud of in these 32 years?
I mean, other than growing a nice firm and employing a lot of people and helping over 40,000 people, which I think is obvious. Last year, we took another pro bono type justice case. A man was convicted of killing his daughter. The Michigan Innocence Clinic called me and said, Michael, we've been listening to some of your podcasts interviewing wrongfully convicted men and women, and we think you have a passion for this. Will you help us? And I said, I've never handled a drunk driving case, let alone a murder case. And I learned that you could file a 6,500 motion, and if you lose it, that's his last shot. He will die in prison. Long story short, I read the criminal transcript. I realized he didn't get a fair trial. My gut told me he didn't get a fair trial. I agreed to take on the case. My legal team, my appellate team helped me, and we, in a relatively short period of time, 2 years, we got him out. We got him out of prison. We got the conviction overturned. We got him exonerated, and he's a free man. He has a baby now. That was probably the best, accomplishment I've had in my years.
I can imagine saving somebody's life is pretty significant. Were you able to get him any compensation for being wrongfully convicted?
Yes, sir. There's a WICA statute here, Wrongfully Incarcerated Corrections Act, I think it is. It's statutory. We don't take a fee off of it, but we helped him. It's 50,000 a year for the years that he was in. And the Attorney General fought us, but they didn't fight us too hard. He got a nice. He's in the process actually as we speak, getting the money. He doesn't have it yet, but he had his baby a couple months ago, and he's doing well.
And he's got a new life.
He's got a new
He's
life.
got a new life. He's got a new life. That's pretty cool. And then another thing you've done in your career is you started this business coaching, and you wrote a book called Fireproof. And I know a couple of my friends. My friend Ben Dominguez is one of your, there it is. He's in your group right now. My friend Kyle Sherman, used from Lafayette, Louisiana, used to be in it. So tell us about writing that book. How did that come about, and this coaching business?
So in 2019, my COO, John Knockhazel, and I, the firm was running so well. We had time on our hands, and we're like, let's share what we've done here for the last, I don't even know how many, 10, 12 years we've been working together. So we wrote this book. People loved it, and they started calling us for coaching. And after originally saying, no, I'm not interested in coaching, we decided it'd be a fun way to meet people, give back to the legal community, teach. And so we set up a program, and I think we have 70 law firms enrolled, mostly injury law firms, some criminal, some immigration, a couple divorce, but it's basically two in-person summits a year that's included. We coach them quarterly on an all-day thing. We have live calls twice a month. We give them great software and tools, and we introduce them to vendors, and they're thriving, and they're learning how to delegate, and they're learning how to set core values, and they're learning how to do processes throughout the firm, and how to make sure their marketing and advertising is Cherry Garcia, not vanilla flavored, which I'm a big proponent of. I hate legal advertising except for mine. I love mine. And I, I get compliments everywhere I go about my advertising. We've won lots of national ads, and I just think we do it different. And so I hope everybody does it different. So I'm seeing better ads and better marketing across the country, which I love, because lawyers don't need to be boring and vanilla and follow the pack. So, and then we believe that if you go through our coaching program, you become fireproof, and you could deal with fires and tornadoes and floods and big advertisers coming into your market if you're ready and if you're prepared and you're connected to your community and your community loves you and knows you. They're not calling anybody else. And so we are by far the largest firm in Michigan, times, I don't even know, 5 or 10 times. And I think it's all the answers and all the things we've done are in the book if you want to do that in your market.
All right. And, you've accomplished a lot in your legal career, clearly. But
Thank you.
what would you say is like, maybe your biggest regret, or, things maybe you wish you've done differently even in spite of all your success?
So early on, I put all my eggs in one basket. If you read my book, I was getting 70+% of my cases from one firm. I had 30 people and I was relying on this person. And one day he said, no more, no mas, get out of here, hit the road. And I was like, holy shit, how am I going to feed these people? So I had to go on TV, and that's the answer to what I did. But putting all my eggs in one basket wasn't great. I waited too long to hire a business coach. I thought I could do it on my own, and I needed to hire a business coach, so I waited too long. That's another regret. But other than that, I really don't have any regrets. I've enjoyed the practice. I love the practice. It gave me learning how to delegate and learning everything I learned with my business coach. I never missed a soccer game. I never missed a field hockey game. I drove my kids to school. I made their lunches. I never was home later than 5:30 at night. Like, I was not a workaholic because I set up my law firm like a true business early. And as this growth explosion happened from 30 people to 230 people, I had processes in place that my workload never increased. So we teach that stuff.
Where does Mike Morse, the trial lawyer, or the trial lawyer in the building, because it's one day at a time, one trial at a time, where do you go from here?
Well, I haven't told anybody this outside of my firm yet, but September 23rd, I signed up for another trial. And I'm reading through the transcripts, and I'm watching an amazing 3-hour TBI video on TLU at night right now with Nick Rowley and Sean Claggett about a monster case. I'm watching his opening right now and taking notes, and I'm getting pumped. This is a police officer who struck a garbage truck who ran the red light. The garbage truck ran the red light. He's got a mild traumatic brain injury, 2 neck surgeries, never gone back to work, against a unlimited carrier. And I said, this is a great set of facts. Get me involved, and I want to try this case. And my team's looking at me like, okay, let's do it. So again, they worked it up. I'm going to come in for the trial, and it's in the same courthouse as this one that we've talked about on this show. And I don't know if I'm crazy. I don't know if I'm extra cocky. I don't know if I'm extra confident. I really don't know. This has literally happened in the last 3-4 days.
I think it's all 3, but just saying for the record, from sitting from the outside, it's all 3.
It'll be a month later. Like my firm is so busy that I could try cases every month if I wanted, every other month. I absolutely could, and I might burn out. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's on the books. Whether it goes or not is obviously up to the judge, but I'm knee deep in it.
Let's hope it does go, because then we can talk about it in Vegas. Because
wouldn't that be
there's
cool?
Nothing better for a trial lawyer. I think there's nothing better than hitting a verdict and then going to a conference. Because just like you hit that last verdict, and then next thing you know is this conference in Chicago, like the following weekend, because you're still floating high. Everybody knows about it. Everybody's talking about it. And I had never met one trial lawyer in my whole career that didn't like to talk about their verdicts. Hence, that's why my business works so well, because trial love to talk about their verdicts. It's crazy, Mike.
You're right.
I'm like, please just stop asking me about how I did it. Okay, one last time I'll tell y'all. But anyways, all right. Well, Mike, thanks for spending time with us here today. I know that you're headed up to northern Michigan, to Charlevoix, and I look forward to seeing you. I look forward to hearing about this next verdict, and to seeing you in October at TLU Live in Las Vegas.
Thanks so much, Dan. I appreciate it.
Ready to train with the Titans and set records with your verdicts? Register for our live conferences and boot camps at triallawyersuniversity.com. Start getting your reps in before the big event by going to tluondemand.com to gain instant access to live lectures, case analysis, and skills training videos from the trial lawyer champions you love and respect, as well as pleadings, transcripts, PowerPoints, and notes for a roadmap to victory. Join the group that continues to get extraordinary results. Trial Lawyers University, produced and powered by LawPods.